is Charles Scoble, your Golden Harvest agronomist, with your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday podcast here on September the 19th. Now let's get a heat unit accumulation update. We're going to talk about how harvest factors can help us maximize soybean yields and talk with our Enogen Specialist to get an update on this year's silage harvest. So, as far as our current heat unit accumulation, now we're basing that on a planting date of May the 1st. I was actually really expecting us to again go ahead in the heat unit accumulations, but instead we're actually remaining a little bit behind. In fact, in the East Lansing area, we've now accumulated 2,362 heat units. So in comparison, we're behind 86 heat units from last year and 42 heat units behind the 5-year average. If we go south into Coldwater, which is reflective of that northern Indiana, northern Ohio areas that I cover, we're now 96 heat units behind last year and also 74 behind the 5-year average. And finally, going north to the Mount Pleasant area, we're 88 units behind last year, but only 13 heat units behind the 5-year average. And looking back, it's actually interesting how those warmer years of 2021 and 2024 have really influenced that 5-year average numbers kind of upward. As far as my travels this past week, I've had another great field day in South Bend area of Indiana. Yeah, boy, the crops there, they're looking pretty darn good relative to some of our other areas. I've also had some harvest for some silage plots. And, those things, though they're looking a little bit variable in the field, it's going to be really nice to see the yield and the quality of this year's crop once we get some of that data returned from the labs. Now, in northern Ohio, the later planted crop still has a ways to go on the corn side, but the soybeans are turning really only slightly behind the earlier planted beans in the rest of our area. I also had a chance to walk some of our research plots this week. It's always exciting to see those experimental hybrids this time of the year. I'll say that there's some actually really exciting products in these plots this year, and it wouldn't surprise me if a number of them make it into that full commercial status in the advancement process later this fall. Now, finally, I've been getting some soybean yield numbers in. I got some from northern Ohio the other day, and our 2.6 variety was rolling in with yields in the mid to upper 60s. And, with this dry fall, he was pretty excited to be hitting those numbers. Now, so as we are getting into soybean harvest, though, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I'm just a little nervous about the potential of harvest loss affecting the potential yield of this year's soybean crop. Most of the area has been really more than just a little bit dry for the past month, and we know that can increase harvest loss. So, according to some of our Agronomy in Action research, there's actually about 3 factors we really need to consider to try to maximize that yield at harvest. Those 3 things are: 1, reducing soybean field loss; 2, managing soybean moisture levels; and 3, minimizing soybean pod shatter. So as we think about that first factor of reducing field loss, we need to plan on spending just a little more time with our combine adjustments, and we got to check behind the combine on the ground for beans just laying out there. And in fact, if we find just 4 to 5 seeds per square foot behind the combine, that actually equals a 1 bushel per acre loss. So be sure, all of our knives are sharp. We make adjustments throughout the day as the temperatures and humidity levels continue to change. And as for managing soybean moisture levels, remember that the drier the beans, the greater the harvest loss and the less weight we're sending to the elevator. In fact, if you let your beans get down to 10% moisture, you're actually seeing a 3.3% potential yield reduction. And at 8% moisture, you're seeing a 5.4% potential yield reduction. Now, this may be a good reason to harvest more of our beans in the morning, where we can kind of take advantage of some of those dews and higher humidity levels before that sun gets out and just dries it off completely. Now, finally, reducing pod shatter, that third aspect, is key to really getting more beans to the bin. Now, genetically, we do our best to select against varieties that shatter too easily, but the environment has the greatest influence on this yield robbing situation. Now, the biggest challenge is when bean pods go through that process of wetting and then re-drying over time. And boy, with the current dryness of these beans in the field and with the rain forecasted here this weekend for many of us, we could start to see some of this already. And in fact, with all the heavy dews, we've been seeing a lot of heavy dews lately and some fogs. This too can create just enough moisture to start that process. And so, really we just need to take some time, remember that there's just no good reason to delay this harvest. And the sooner we can get out there, the sooner we can make sure that we keep more of the beans in the bin and less they're out on the ground. Now, next up today is Christy Kylan, our Enogen Specialist. Now, in addition to working for Golden Harvest, Christy and her family also have their own dairy farm where they've been growing and feeding Enogen corn for years. Now, I asked Christy to jump on the podcast today just to give us an update on how silage harvest is going this year and to share some of her insights on how we can make the best silage possible given the environmental challenges of this year. So, Christy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Charles, and thanks for having me this morning.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, very timely information as harvest is well underway. Some parts of the state are further along than others. Seeing a lot of different things so far in regards to the weather that we've been having and these dry conditions. What we've been seeing is that it's been a little bit difficult trying to decide when the ideal time is to take your silage this year. So seeing a lot of that plant drier than maybe the ear. So what I caution guys this year is don't just go out and pull the ears and look for that milk line, right? Because we'll see a wet ear and a dry stalk. And kind of the fear I have with that is if we're putting up really dry silage this year, we have some issues with fermentation. That along with packing the bunk. And we know that a good fermentation and a good pack on a bunk is kind of what we need for ideal silage. So I would encourage guys, make sure you're taking samples, drying them down, making sure we know what to look for in a good silage harvest this year. So the other thing, it's a little bit early. We're still waiting on some of these samples to come back. But with a dry year, we know typically the fiber digestibility is maybe a little bit lower than other years. So definitely something to consider as we get going, some things to watch out for. Along with that ear having some trouble drying down, we may see some lower starch in our silage samples this year as well. So just a few watch outs. And then the other thing I think I'll leave you guys with at this point is silage harvest can get very fast and very unsafe. So I just want you guys to be very safe out there. Make sure you know where these wagons and trucks and choppers are at all times and make sure that they can see you. That's kind of all I've got for you today, Charles.
Well, Christy, I really appreciate that insight. And I know you guys have been really busy getting your own silage up. And as I'm driving around the state, there's just all kinds of trucks and choppers going across the fields, and it's just great to see that's all wrapping up here, and that's certainly going to affect the ability for these cows to produce milk the rest of the year, doing this right this time of the year. So appreciate your insights, and folks, as we wrap up this week's Agronomy in Action Focus Friday podcast, like always, let's continue to get out there and walk those fields. As we discussed, silage harvest is in full swing. Soybean harvest has started for some, and our cornfields are turning fast. Those droughtier fields that have cannibalized their stalks, they're gonna be needed to be scheduled for harvest prior to stalk lodging. And so let's just not get behind on harvesting those soybean fields either. This is Charles Scoble, your Golden Harvest agronomist, with your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday. Have a great week.